Welcome to the Up Arrow podcast with William Harris, featuring top business leaders sharing strategies and resources to get to the next level. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everybody, William Harris here. I'm the founder and CEO of Elumynt and the host of this podcast where I feature experts in the D2C industry sharing strategies on how to scale your business and achieve your goals. I'm really excited about the guest that I have today, Jess Chan. Jess is the founder of Longplay and Backbone. Longplay is a full-service retention marketing agency, while Backbone is the first email strategy automation tool. Both of these are for the D2C e-commerce brands. Jess bootstrapped Longplay to 7 figures in its first year, and it has generated over $300 million in revenue for D2C brands. That's a lot of revenue. Jess, I'm excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, and I think Raphael Pauline Daigle over at Splitbase is the one who introduced us to us. Raphael is absolutely a genius when it comes to CRO, so I was excited to see that he recommends you as well, because that carries a lot of weight with me.
I appreciate that. I was very flattered and honored to be recommended and excited to be here.
Cool. I do want to go ahead and real quick, we're going to get into the good stuff in a minute, but I want to give our sponsorship message here. This episode is brought to you by Elumynt. Elumynt is an award-winning advertising agency optimizing e-commerce campaigns around profit. In fact, we've helped 13 of our customers get acquired, with the largest one selling for nearly $800 million, and one of them that IPO'd recently. And we were ranked as the 12th fastest growing agency in the world by Adweek. You can learn more on our website at elumynt.com. That's ELUMYNT.com. That said, that's enough of the boring stuff. On to the good stuff. Jess, tell me a little bit about your backstory. Where have you come from that has brought you to who you are today, starting these companies that are now very successful? What's that trajectory like?
Yeah, kind of fast forwarding through childhood and high school years, I actually have a background in actuarial science and economics, and then a minor in political science. So that was like my original degree in college. And it's very, very quant-based, very methodical thinking. I remember doing years of like theoretical multivariate calculus where we never saw any numbers.
Nice.
All these points will come back kind of full circle into like the entrepreneur journey in a second. But I always think back on that Steve Jobs quote of like, you don't know how the dots are going to connect until you're looking back.
Totally.
So that was kind of my background. And midway through college, I went through a period of like panic attacks, depression, suicidal thoughts, just like not a great period. And also really realizing like, I don't really want to be in an insurance company cranking out spreadsheets for the rest of my life. And kind of getting out of that dark period and exploring what I wanted to do next, I ended up stumbling into a job as a marketing assistant. And I was working 2 marketing assistant jobs actually in my 4th year of college while finishing school. The first was for the e-com company, and then the second was for a B2B SaaS company. So I was doing both of those, and eventually when I graduated, they both offered me CMO positions, and ended up taking the one for the direct-to-consumer e-com company, and it's a company called Best Self Co. And it was just the perfect opportunity at the perfect time. We were selling physical productivity tools to entrepreneurs. They had just finished a Kickstarter, so it was like still very early stage, but like we had a lot of traction, like young, hungry team. It was 2017, 2018 when like we could just do anything and everything worked. It was beautiful. I think that really gave me a ground level like entry point into building an e-com business, working really closely with the founders. And also really seeing like how to run a company as a CMO. So that was kind of the early stage. And then eventually I was going to entrepreneur events. Everyone was kind of asking me like, hey, what's your strategy around XYZ in building a business? And I would kind of just literally show them or give them a breakdown or, tear down recommendations. And eventually it was like, hey, could we just like hire you for consulting? I'm like, sure, let me just say yes to everything. And then eventually it became like, hey, the consulting is great, but we don't have time to do this. Like, can you just do it for us? So I actually, when I first started quote unquote Longplay, which was really more so freelancing, I said yes to everything. I did like brand marketing, content marketing, wrote some video scripts, drafted a book, like literally said yes to everything, and eventually honed in on email marketing being just, no one else was really doing it at that time. In terms of specializing in it. And it was more scalable, sustainable, had a better moat around it. So I thought it was just a better business model. So doubled down on email marketing, built up Longplay, and then now obviously expanded more so to retention marketing. And then we just launched Backbone from that as well. So that's kind of the early stages of that entrepreneurial journey.
That's awesome. I love it. You talked about how eventually it turned into people saying, hey, these are great ideas, but can you just do it as well? And I feel like that reminds me a lot of magicians in general too, where you could show somebody how to do the trick, but being able to do it to the point where it looks like magic is very hard. And I know a lot of people are worried about sharing their knowledge and their insights or their brilliance or their playbook online. But the reality is I've found, and I'm sure it seems like maybe you have as well, just sharing your secret sauce, quote unquote, out there. Most people are going to look at that and take that as an opportunity to say, wow, you really have thought this through and you understand it. Can you actually just go ahead and do it then as well, instead of having somebody else try to mimic it or do it, as well?
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think a lot of early, like you said, early stage entrepreneurs are scared of like giving away their secrets. And I always like have kind of two different responses to that, depending on the person. But on the one hand, it's like, just give as freely as you can, and it always comes back around. Like the best entrepreneurs, the people who have the best network, have the best relationships, can access anybody, are the ones who are just so freely helping wherever and whenever they can. And it's just really about like being as helpful as you possibly can. And like somehow, somewhere, a partnership will come to light. The other side of it is I always say, like, if you're really as good as you think you are, you should be able to do this again. And you should continue to reinvent your IP. You should be continuing to stay ahead of the curve. It's like, you can take all my secrets, like take everything I know, because it's like, I may have taught you everything that I know, but I haven't taught you everything I might have taught you everything you know, but I haven't taught you everything I know. And I think that's a really more of like an egotistical approach to it. But I do think that's what allows you to continue innovating as an entrepreneur, because you kind of have to keep up with yourself if you're giving freely as well.
It's almost like the All-American Rejects knew something about business, right? I'll give you my dirty little secrets. That might not even be the real words. I wasn't really that good into punk or whatever. But so you also talked about how quant is going to come back a little bit later on. I don't know when, but I'm excited about that as well, just because, you're talking about some of the, multivariate calculus and everything. And I was doing some just for fun quaternions and studying, four-dimensional and extra-dimensional math. And I think there's a lot of just fun getting into math. So I don't know when or where we weave that stuff back into here, but I'm excited for that potential. I do want to get into the meat and potatoes of the talk here too, which is, you and I were talking earlier, the importance of a retention marketing ecosystem. And I like that you called it an ecosystem as opposed to just retention marketing. It's like this whole breadth of stuff. A lot of people, they say, oh yeah, we do retention marketing. We do email. And then maybe if they're a little bit better, it's like we do email and SMS. But then there's all these other components that also have to do with retention marketing from an ecosystem standpoint. What are some of these other components that you're thinking of when you say the ecosystem of retention marketing?
Yeah, I'm so excited to dive into this because I feel like people don't talk about it enough. Like we said, email and SMS are really just channels of retention marketing. But when we're really thinking about a retention marketing ecosystem, there's kind of a few different components to it. One is like all the different channels and apps and kind of the infrastructure of how you retain a customer. And the second piece of it is actually thinking about it from a customer lifecycle mapping kind of standpoint. I think e-commerce in general as an industry is extremely behind in just like this way of thinking about business in a way that like B2B SaaS or B2C SaaS is already, operating at that level. Mm-hmm. It's really about applying this like ecosystem and this customer lifecycle marketing approach to direct to consumer e-commerce. From an ecosystem standpoint, like email and SMS are great channels. There's also direct mail. There's also Facebook Messenger. There's also apps such as like quizzes, loyalty programs, referral programs. How do you generate word of mouth? How do you get your existing customers to refer a friend or post about you online? How do you generate repeat purchases in terms of like cross-selling customers, getting them more bought into your ecosystem? And also, how do you launch subscriptions in a way that you're not just, hey, we have a subscription available, but how are you introducing customers to subscription, reducing churn, winning back customers? There's all these different components to this ecosystem. And email and SMS really are like the tip of the iceberg of like at this point in how mature consumers are and how mature e-commerce is as an industry. If you're not doing email and SMS, you're like light years behind. If you are doing email and SMS, that is just the baseline, and there's so much more to be doing.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing you brought up, which is really important, is like it's an ecosystem. So it's not about slapping on one channel, another channel, and it's not about like, hey, we're doing retention because we have a loyalty program and we set it up and it's, you know, buried in the footer of our website somewhere that someone can sign up for.
Right.
It's about how do all these different components feed each other? How does email help grow your SMS subscriber list? How does SMS feed people into joining a loyalty program? How do you use your loyalty program to retain subscription customers? It's about how all these different components really connect and feed each other.
Yeah, and I think in order to do this well, one of the things that I've noticed, and I've heard said before, I might butcher the quote, but if it doesn't get measured, it doesn't get done. And to a point, that means in order to do retention marketing better, you need to have the right metrics that you're looking at for retention marketing, as aside from all of the other metrics that you might be looking at, the other KPIs for acquisition. And I know that at least from an advertising perspective, we really like to even bucket out some of the tactics we're doing on the ad side based on whether or not we've acquired them. First of all, I look at there's two main funnels. There's everything we're doing to get you to be a customer, so the acquisition side. And then there's everything that we're doing after you've become a customer, right? And there's intentional work that we put into that side of things as well, even on the ad side, where we call those LTV campaigns. Our main focus oftentimes there is how do we increase the LTV of those customers? And in order for them to become a long-term customer, they have to get to their second purchase. That's one of the first things that has to happen. At some point in time, they have to purchase number 2, not number 8, right? They have to purchase their second time. And Alex Greifeld, she's a strategist there at Know Best Practices, actually posted about this on LinkedIn as well just the other day. You need to get that second purchase. That's the number one thing that you can do. But, and here's where I feel like a lot of people go wrong with this. So a lot of people think that means the day after you've purchased something, we're going to show you ads to buy again. And it's like, no, you've missed the point, because the day after you purchase, you want them to fall in love with your brand, fall in love with the purchase that they just made. Then when you come back and want them to buy again, they're excited about that. And I feel like that's where a lot of these other parts of the email and the SMS and the loyalty system, like they can tie into that before even not necessarily saying the purchase. But yeah, you agree or disagree, or what do you think?
I completely agree. And I think, oh man, I'm getting excited because you've touched on so many different points there. I was like, my brain was like, I have like 5 different things I could say here. And I think it's exactly this, where even when we talk about like what gets measured gets managed. I find with retention marketing, the biggest mistake that a lot of e-commerce marketers make is they apply the same way of analyzing and thinking about numbers and thinking about how quickly the return should happen and ROI that you should be doing at the top of the funnel. You apply the exact same mindset to retention. Mm-hmm. And they're actually two totally different things, because you have this time span factor that is completely different. And when we go back to something like a post-purchase experience and getting that second order, most marketers or e-commerce owners think about it as like, okay, cool, we have to get the second order. So what are the 5 different things we can do to get the second order as quickly as possible? And then our repeat purchase rate goes up. But what they don't realize is like, you might help get a few repeat purchases from that, but you're also burning out a bunch of people who might have bought from you that you're now turning off. And that is not very perfectly measurable, even though you can look at it holistically and model it out. So there's an element of like what gets measured gets managed, but also you have to manage the things that can't get measured as well. And this is the ecosystem, right? It's like we can measure each of the individual parts of the ecosystem to make sure it's all working, but there's this underlying like 30%, 40% of like good things that are happening that like fundamentally just cannot be measured, because it's about how these pieces connect together. So we find like, for example, post-purchase nurture is like one of the most like neglected areas of just very ground level basic retention marketing, because, a good post-purchase nurture sequence is surprising and delighting. They have a great experience with your first product. They want to talk about it with friends. They just like overall have a great experience with the product, and it increases the likelihood for them to come back again. But all of that is very, like, that's not going to be able to be measured on an email revenue, open rate, click rate perspective, right? And sometimes staying silent is the best way to actually increase, the brand relationship with your customer as well. So I think there's all these different elements. And a lot of the time, e-commerce and marketing is around like, what can we do? What can we do that's going to create the result that we want to do, that we want to have? And what is the next tactic, next thing that we can implement to make this thing happen? And like, quite frankly, like, retention marketing is not a science, and it's an art, as with all of business building. It's an art. And like, not all of it is going to be measured perfectly each time, but it's
the quant.
Valuable. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Post-purchase nurture, sometimes use silence, you were talking about. That reminds me of one of the things that I talked to our team about is treating customers the way that you would think, at least thinking about it like a relationship, like an actual, like, boyfriend, girlfriend relationship, or whatever relationship you want to talk about here. But it's the idea of, let's say that you did go on a first date. You maybe could potentially increase your chances of a second date if you ask the person, like, while you're sitting down at dinner, you're like, okay, so let's go and schedule our next date here right now. Like, maybe you will end up having more second dates on average, but the relationship is probably going to die off pretty soon as well. Like, you may be impacting the long-term, the LTV of that relationship. Versus, oftentimes maybe at the end of the date, it's like, hey, let it simmer a little bit. Give it a day. Let them like become intrigued and excited about the, excitement of the product and about the excitement of who you are. And I think that that's something that if you can flip on that part of your brain and think about the relationship with the customer like a real human relationship, then it allows you to think more methodically about how you're going about these nurtures and flows.
I love that. And I think you touch on a really good point where it's like, it's the dance, right? It's the dance between like, when do you lead, when do you back off, like when you say something, when you let them speak, like it is an art. And I think honestly, one of the simplest ways to like really be able to like master this is just having that skill set of empathy. I think empathy is like one of the most underrated, most important skill sets as an entrepreneur. And empathy isn't necessarily like sympathy. Empathy is just being able to literally put yourself in the other person's shoes, understand their perspective, understand their behavior on why they're doing something the way they are, so you can understand how they're going to receive what you are doing, right? So if you're just putting yourself in the perspective of the customer, it's like, hey, I just bought something. What kind of experience would I have that would make me a raving fan? Like, what kind of experience would I want to have that would make me want to post about this on social media and actually use the product? And what might be reasons that I don't? And just it's just that simple. And just reconnecting from a human standpoint, because we always forget that at the end of the day, all of business is just humans. You're either working with them, leading them, selling to them, managing them. It's all people.
Or machines that think that they're people now with AI. But
that's true.
Okay, so then I want to pull back a little bit because I had hinted at, you need the right metrics for tracking these things. In your opinion, what are some of the key metrics that we should be tracking for retention marketing to know if we're doing a good job there? Is it just repeat purchase rate, or what are your favorite ones to look at?
Yeah, we actually look at the metrics for retention marketing more so from a customer lifecycle standpoint, because so I'll kind of start off with how we typically measure things, and then we can talk about kind of the common mistakes that we see. The first one is we'll just take a list let's just take email, for example, to keep things simple. Taking a look at what's the list size. So this is the number of people, like your audience, that you can actually email. What percentage of your list has made a purchase from you before? And what percentage of your list has never made a purchase from you before? And just get your non-purchaser purchaser rate. And then out of the people who haven't purchased from you, what percentage of them haven't engaged in the last 3 months, haven't engaged in the last 6 months, haven't engaged in the last year? And that's going to give you a very clear gradient on like where your customer drop off is happening. And this goes back to what you were saying, Alex was saying, is like, we can talk about LTV all we want, but if someone's not making a second purchase, I can guarantee you they're not making a third purchase. So we actually don't need all this data. We actually just need to know where people are dropping off in this ideal customer journey. And the other metrics that we measure is essentially like not just repeat purchase rate, because that's actually a very vague term and you can't really do much with repeat purchase rate. What you can do, what you can do,
I'm with you 100%.
Only criticism on you is more so like that's what's commonly referenced as repeat purchase rate.
Right.
And also, total side tangent, but returning customer rate on Shopify is the most useless metric I have ever seen, which is like what percentage.
100% agree. I just didn't want to put you on the spot and say that, so I'm glad that you are on the same page there.
Every once in a while, I'm just like, what percentage of your website visitors are returning customers? I'm like, in what world is this useful information to make any sort of strategic decision? Like, it's more of like, it gets you feel good. But anyways, that was a total side tangent. So in terms of, instead of measuring like repeat purchase rate, we're measuring what percentage of people who make a first purchase go on to make a second purchase? What percentage of those second purchasers go on to make a third purchase? What percentage of your purchasers go on to start a subscription? What percentage of those people renew a first time, renew a second time, renew a third time? What percentage of people, don't come back after 90 days? So we're really breaking out, instead of saying like, we have an ideal LTV of this much and this is our ideal customers, like break down exactly what milestones and behaviors you want them to take with you over a three-year period, let's say, and just map out like what percentage of them do and don't take these actions, and also where is that drop off happening. And you can extend this to like signing up for a loyalty program, posting about you on social media, joining a referral program. You can apply this methodology to all parts of the retention ecosystem.
Yeah. And I think that's the key is once you have that set up and you have those types of buckets, now if you're doing email and you decide to add SMS, you can see if you've made an impact on any of those things that are going to lead towards longer, better lifetime value. And then when you add on a direct mail campaign, it's not just like that immediate ROI, but it's like, is this impacting the LTV by increasing my third purchase rate or whatever this might be, right? And so all of these different things that are coming along the line of what we need to see.
Yeah, exactly. And since you kind of brought up LTV, I'll kind of dig into this a little bit too. I find LTV to be a very funny metric. It's a good reference point in terms of how to think about something, but LTV is an equation. Like it is the result of multiple other actual metrics. And when we think about LTV, when we think about like, hey, we got to increase LTV, I'm like, there's about like 10 different factors that increase LTV, and we cannot pull all 10 levers at once. So when we say increasing LTV, typically it's more of this like general spray and pray type approach. We're just thinking about it methodically, which is like LTV is how many purchases they make, how much they spend per order, how frequently they come back, the time span of that. And also what's the average order value on the first purchase, second purchase, third purchase.
Yes.
So there's just a lot there to unpack when we're really thinking like critically about these metrics that are very commonly referenced in e-commerce, but usually are not like really dug into.
That's the segmentation that I really appreciate as well, because the AOV on the first purchase versus the second purchase is usually wildly different. For some brands, maybe they have a smaller first purchase and then they have a bigger second purchase. For others, it's a bigger first purchase, a smaller second purchase. And so when you're looking at LTV, like you said, it could be very muddy as far as, well, did you actually just lower the cost for the barrier for them to enter by having a lost leader of sorts or whatever? Now they're just buying more on the second purchase. Or did you increase their first purchase by bundling something, and so they're just buying more on that first one, but their second purchase now drops off, and so maybe that's not as good as what you want for long-term growth. And so there's a lot of ways to look at this, and it just gets buried. The term that I like to use with this is Bayes' theorem, where you can have some lurking variables. And I've written about this on the ad side, but I haven't written about it on that side of things as well. But I feel like this is one of those things that shows up so much in people's data, and they don't know to look for it. But it's there.
Yeah, and this is why I always bring up like ecosystem, because like, everything is interconnected. It's like if you think about like the planet's ecosystems, like you take out the bees and suddenly like there's a whole cascade of effects on like things that break. And it's the same thing in retention marketing, and really the same on top of funnel as well. But it's like we have a lot of clients or people who come to us and it's like, hey, we want to increase first purchase AOV, and it's like, we can do that, but if you don't let us look at the entire ecosystem, we will do that at the cost of your business. Like you think a metric is going up, but 10 other metrics are going down, and it's actually hurting you. And that's a common mistake that we see in terms of how typically e-commerce brands also incentivize vendors as well as incentivize their internal team members. Like, here are 2 KPIs for you to hit: increase first purchase order value and increase your repeat purchase rate. It's like, I can do that. If that is all I'm incentivized for, I can do that, and I will burn out your entire company. And that's always something we like consistently warn brands against. Is like, do not you cannot tunnel vision that way when it comes to your marketing.
I completely agree with you, and this is where you and I talked about the idea of like long-term success, versus just going for like the tactic of the day. And I think we're kind of already hitting on that in context. And so, what are, even on the retention side, you mentioned post-purchase nurture being one of the areas that a lot of people get wrong. What are some of the other areas that when you come into a brand, and I think I even saw Dr. Squatch on your website, like you've got some really awesome brands. When you come into these brands, because most of who we're really targeting towards here are brands that are, trying to go from 8 to 9 figures, 9 to 10 figures. Mm-hmm. So they have some level of sophistication already in place. What are the other issues that you see typically when you come into them from a brand nurture standpoint, from a retention standpoint, I should say?
No, I'm glad you brought up Dr. Squash, because they just have a great business model that's very easy for people to understand on the outside, to like just really reference a lot of different things to play with. And I always there's just certain business models where you're like, ooh, yes, like there's so much to strategically play with here. Whereas like some brands is like there's just less to strategically play with. So Dr. Squash is a great one. And we actually have a case study on our website, which is like, they came to us and were like, hey, how do we increase 6-month customer lifetime value? So then it became this breakdown of like, lifetime value is a huge thing. 6-month customer lifetime value is even a bigger thing, because like which customers, like there are so many different types of customers. So it's really about figuring what levers to pull. So you typically find like at that the 8 to 9, and the 9 to like high 9s, maybe even 10 figures these days. The couple things are, one, you have to segment your customers and you have to figure out different customer life cycles. So when we're even thinking about 6-month customer lifetime value, let's take Dr. Squatch, for example. We first started off by breaking it out into what are the 4 different major customer buckets. So there is one, which is single purchasers, like people who just come onto your site, buy one product or maybe a bundle, and that's it. So that's going to be like your first customer group. Your second customer group is going to be people who come onto your site and buy from multiple product categories. So maybe they buy like soap and deodorant. So that's customer bucket number 2. Sure. Third is going to be people who have a quarterly subscription. In the case of Dr. Squatch. Fourth is going to be people who have a monthly subscription. So those were like the core 4 buckets of customer lifecycle that actually affected strategy. And then from there, we really just broke down like what percentage of customers fall into each of those buckets, because that's going to decide where we dedicate our resources and our ROI. It's like, let's not, and I'm just making up numbers here just to have no disclosure, but let's say we're like, hey, we can do a lot of work in monthly subscribers, but only like 2% of their customers are monthly subscribers. And it's like, why are we, it's like, even if we increase this by 300%, that's not going to really move the needle much for your business, right? So we really have to prioritize what levers to pull, where you're actually going to have the highest return. And sometimes like we want to find the buckets where we only need a 0.5% growth to have a, $100 million like impact on the bottom line, right? And obviously those are big numbers, but that's what we're looking for. From there, we're mapping out, okay, we want to map out 6-month customer lifetime value. Let's map out the ideal customer lifetime value or customer life cycle over that 6 months. So it's like over 6 months, we want them to make their first purchase. We want them to expand to multiple product categories, because that's going to increase average order value. Because if we can get the impact of getting someone to subscribe to a single product versus they're buying 2 different types of products that they're subscribing both to, like that, now you've doubled your lifetime value just from getting them to try a new product, right? So we're trying to figure out what some of those levers are to pull over a 6-month period, mapping that out on like, when does it make sense to upsell them to a subscription? When does it make sense to cross-sell them to a different product category? When does it make, and also what do they need to receive from a messaging standpoint to make those decisions? So like, when should we start educating them on hair care to hopefully have them add hair care to their next subscription? So those are that, and this is obviously a super high level overview on like the approach, but that is how granular and methodical your thinking needs to be to get in that 8 to 9 figure range.
Yeah. And that's exactly what needs to happen. I feel like it's very similar to solving a Rubik's Cube. That's an example that I give to people a lot of times, where in order to solve the first layer of the Rubik's Cube, you almost just have to say, this one I want to move here, and you just do it. It's very simple. To solve the second layer, though, you have to think a little bit more. The algorithm to do so is a little bit longer, where you're like, I need to move this one without moving these ones. So I got to move this. Okay, got it. and that move to that one piece. That's it. You just did these like 4 or 5 moves to move one piece where you needed it to be potentially, right? But then to get into that third layer, the algorithm can become much longer. Maybe it's 8 moves to move one piece or whatever that might be. And so the idea, and I'm not a speed cuber, there are people who could do that much faster than doing 8 moves to one piece. But the idea here being that, as you're growing and your brand is growing, the granularity that you're going to need in these metrics and these tactics needs to increase. And you need somebody who's saying, I'm looking at this on a more refined approach on each one of these different levels in order to get to that point where everything's operating at a point where you're 9 or even high 9-10 figure business.
Exactly. And I think that's brings up a really great point. Is like at this point, talked to so many CEOs, founder of different companies. And the biggest difference between like 7, 8, and 9 is like 7 is like, you're still kind of throwing stuff on the wall and seeing what sticks. It's a little bit like random, kind of looking for the silver bullets. 8 is like you're getting relatively methodical, but it's still very channel specific thinking, which is we are optimizing our email now. Now we're launching TikTok. Now we're doing Snapchat, and they're still looking for those big wins. By 9 figures, it's like we realize there's probably no big wins anymore, especially in terms of e-commerce. They might expand to retail and things like that. But there's no big wins anymore. It's really about increasing everything incrementally and consistently. And it's about having 1% changes in 3, 4, 5 different parts of the algorithm, not a 10% increase in one variable, because at that point, you've already squeezed out anything that was low-hanging fruit. Now it's about like incremental growth. So those are the biggest mindset differences, also just approach to marketing that we've seen.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I want to also dig into a little bit about who you are as a human being. One of the things that we talk about on this podcast on every episode is the human side of the people on this. It's actually one of our core values as a company as well. Is we talk about be human. And especially in the day of AI right now, the lines between what is human and what isn't seem to be blurring very interestingly with a lot of different stuff. And so I do want to dig into, though, what makes you who you are. And one of the things that you had me check out was your Diary of an Entrepreneur, probably the longest Twitter thread I've seen in a very long time, where you're literally documenting out, almost on a daily basis, what it's like to be an entrepreneur. What inspired you to do that?
I'm so excited to talk about this. So I'm starting, second business now with Backbone, it's B2B SaaS. And in it, it was like really realizing that shifting back from operating a business and growing like an already stable scaling business to starting a new one, it's a totally different mindset, totally different like place you have to be in. And it gave me a lot of nostalgia on like starting out Longplay. And I was like, man, I wish I like remembered that like experience. It's so unique. So that was kind of part of it. And also the other side of it was I find with entrepreneurship, we obviously talk a lot about how to build a business and how to scale. But I always bring it back to like the business is the means to the end. And we all went into entrepreneurship for a specific reason, and everyone has a different reason. But overall, it's like we wanted to have the power to build a life that we loved, to like live up to our fullest potential and have just like an amazing experience of life. And business is a means to do that. But often we get so confused in the entrepreneurial experience that we end up sacrificing our day-to-day, our like human experience to grow the business. And then you end up miserable on the other side, and there's a whole thing, right? So this was really about bringing back like the human, like what does it feel like to build a business? Because we can talk about scaling and numbers and hitting milestones all we want, but at the end of the day, like the milestone of even if you are successful and you build that 9-figure business, like that is just a blip. Like the moment you build $100 million business or the moment you have an exit, that is a 1-second experience of like, I did it. And then 99% of the experience is everything from to get there and everything after that. And yeah, we optimize for this 1-second experience. So I really want to really kind of bring to light to kind of remind entrepreneurs and also like start a conversation around it and all the challenging like mental, emotional, physical, psychological experiences in the journey of like building a business. Because like that is your life. Like that is what you are as a human.
Yeah. No, and that's so interesting because I can definitely relate, and I'm sure that most of the founders here of the e-commerce stores that are listening feel the same way, where it does become sometimes all-consuming. And I know I've talked to a lot of, and we've helped 13 customers get acquired, and many of them, as well as many other people that I just know that have sold businesses. When they sell their business, they said it feels like they're selling a piece of their soul. I mean, it becomes your identity to a point, and so. I even just like that idea of you being able to document the thought process and what's going on and the psychology behind what you're doing and why and how you're feeling about these different things. That's a breath of fresh air to anybody who's going down this path, because they're likely the same things that they're dealing with that we all have wrestled with. I've heard it said that you either have a people problem, like as you're scaling and whatever, like all businesses are the same, even though we run different businesses. You either have a people problem, you have a process problem, or you have I feel like there was another P, but for some reason I'm like, it's a finance problem, but I don't know what the other P was there. But it's like one of those three things. What's that? Yeah, profit problem, sure. But it's like you either have some type of an issue with one of those things, and it's how do you deal with that? And for sometimes it can be very emotionally charged as far as how you work through those different things based on how you were raised or what you've experienced. And so I think that's interesting, and I like that you're documenting that out for people.
Thank you. It's been so much fun, and I think the second time around, I just remember the first time, like it took a piece of me, and yeah. I was like, at some point I just remember crying on the floor multiple times, and then getting up to do a sales call, like that was a very real experience. And I was saying, like, the first business really took like a chunk of me. And at some point I was like, I physically cannot do this anymore. I feel like this thing is taking like years off my life. Like, is this even worth it? And the second time around, I'm like, I am still so hungry to build, and I want to continue building.
Yeah.
And also like not doing it that way again. Like, what would it look like to build the second time and be existing in a state of play the entire time? I'm like, if we're playing with Lego, building a sandcastle, we're still building some really cool shit at the end of the day. And also it's really fun along the way. And like, yes, you're going to run into like not finding the right Lego pieces, and you're going to run into someone knocking down your sandcastle, and you're like, God damn, I have to start again. But there's like an element of like playfulness to all of that. And the challenges are still real, but the play is different. The spirit is different. I'm like, that's my hypothesis for myself in the second phase is like, can I build something huge from a state of play and a constant state of like just childlike curiosity and have fun along the way? And then wherever it goes, I've still won. And I think it's just a really fun thing to test.
Yeah, because it's also sometimes very easy as the seasoned entrepreneur to tell people, it's like, oh, don't let it consume you. Don't let it be your life. It's like, make sure you have the balance and whatever. But the reality is oftentimes when you're on, ground zero of building a company, sometimes it's almost necessary to be a little bit imbalanced. And that's hard to remember sometimes after you've gotten this, and you're like, oh, I've already been burned by that. So I'm remembering, but remembering it's like, okay, after you go through this for a second time and you can call out how you're feeling and how you're thinking, it's like probably realizing you're like, oh, there might be this strong desire to make it your life again for a little bit. But you're like, wait, nope, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to have fun with this. And I'm sure that's something that I can relate to at least as well too.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like essentially, like you said, going through this whole process is like with Longplay, where it really got to the point where I'm like, had an amazing team, have an amazing COO. She like runs the day to day, like has that stuff on lock. I was able to have like really like a work life like separation. Right? So I'm like, here's my career, here's my business, and I can do something else. And I was like, oh, like I found this like nice, beautiful, like harmony thing. And then I thought I could continue that starting the second business. I was like, no, to get from 0 to 1, you have to be all in. Yeah. But what does it look like to be all in and be like, let it consume you, but in this like really fun, playful way. Like not in I'm not healthy, I hate myself, if this thing fails, like I am no one. Like I'm like, I love myself. If this thing fails, I had fun building it. And also I'm all in on building like the coolest thing ever. And it's really about that like energetic shift, the mindset shift more than anything else.
That's huge. What about, let's just say similarly, in a similar vein, what do you fear?
What do I fear? I'll give my like old answer and then kind of where I'm at now. For a very long time, building the first business with Longplay, my biggest fear was I had a very vivid image of like being on my deathbed and someone saying or me thinking like, oh, she had so much potential. Like that, like idea of unlived potential was just like this thing in like the core of me that it's like, that would just be the worst ending. And that was what fueled me. It was like, I don't want to have unlived potential. I want to live up to my potential.
Yeah.
And the fear of not doing that and like proving myself fueled Longplay. And recently, I mean, I've been doing years of inner work at this point, but I've actually been doing a lot of psychedelic work, a lot of inner work, and most of that, and a lot of shadow work. And actually all of that has essentially been like leaning into and exploring and like sitting in the absolute worst fears and just being okay with it. So I'm like sitting and like, I'm 100% okay. If I died right now and I was like, she has so much potential, I'm like, you know what? I lived, like I'm human. And really just being 100% okay with like anything that happens. I'm like ready to die at any given point. And like, if I build something and everyone's like, this is the worst company we've ever seen, like you're a terrible entrepreneur, like that is okay. And that is not my identity. So actually at this point, it's like the number of fears I have, I fear cockroaches a ton. Like that fear is not going away. But in terms of like psychological mindset fears, it is really, there isn't really anything that's like really eating me up or like driving me at this point, which I'm very proud of because it's taken a lot of work.
Yeah. And I think that that's something that we do need to work on as a general rule, just as society. It is very easy for those psychological fears to consume us, and then that keeps us from being able to enjoy and receive other good things in life. One of the things that I've got 3 daughters, 13, 10, and 7. And in order to help them to understand that, I had them hold on to some of their toys, right? And so it's like white knuckled grabbing onto their toys kind of thing. So it's like they can't fit anything else in there. And I don't remember exactly how I did this, but something along the lines of it's like, okay, well, you know, what's the value of these toys or whatever? How much are they worth? Maybe it's $20 worth of toys or something. It's like, well, I've got $100 bill here that I'm going to give you that you could go buy whatever you want with, but you can't receive it right now because you're white knuckled holding on to this, these toys or whatever this is. And I think it was because they weren't sharing or something at the time. Right. And just realizing that how many times do we do this in our own lives as adults, right? Where we're so focused on this business, like you just said, it has to succeed because my identity is wrapped up in this business and my self-worth is, and if I died and it goes on my epitaph that like I was not very, I had unmet potential that I didn't live up to. It's like, it would be the worst thing in the world. And it's like, so then we're almost so tight-knuckled that we're not able to even receive some of the other beautiful things that are just entering our lives right at that moment too.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's like 2 really important points to that is, one is the idea of really kind of living in like a meditative state and watching some of these thoughts, right? It's like, we're only human. Like, of course these fears are going to come up, but the difference between them being like real fears versus like random occurring thoughts that come up is like, can you live in a meditative state and essentially operate from a higher state of consciousness where you're like, wow, I see that fear coming up again. It's not affecting my behavior. I'm not panicking about it. I just see that thought cross through. And that is really what the purpose of meditation and inner work and spiritual work should be. Is it's not about meditating in the beginning of your day and feeling better. It's about meditating in the beginning of your day to practice what being in a meditative state feels like and then operating your entire day in it. And the goal is to live 24/7 in meditation. Like that is how you want to be operating. And it's like, then those fears come up, but it's not eating at you. And I think the second piece of this too is, fear is such an incredible fuel for getting off the ground, and it is such an unsustainable fuel to keep going. And you can only run away from something for so long. I'm like, I'd rather be pulled towards running towards something. Like, what am I running towards? What am I excited about? Not what am I running away from? And that's, I think, where people get burnt out. They hit their ceiling. They get sick of something. They're like, I don't want to do this anymore. It's like, yeah, because being fueled by fear is like an extremely exhausting way to live. And also most people aren't even conscious of that. Yeah,
I'm with you 100% on that. There's a Bible verse, and I know that could be controversial to bring up a specific spiritual text, but it's one that I happen to resonate with, where it talks about pray without ceasing. And a lot of times, people think of like prayer as something that you get down on your hands and knees, fold your eyes, fold your hands, close your eyes. And it's like, and you do, and then you get up and then you eat or whatever this might be. Right. But it is that idea of, like you said, it's an existing state of being to be praying without ceasing. It's 24/7, to be meditative without ceasing, to be continually in this state of thankfulness and without fear at that same time, moving forward instead of backward kind of approach.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you also touch on a great point, which is like, it's about getting back up again, right? It's a practice. Like and people get stuck on that with meditation, and also beyond that, which is like, yeah, you meditated and then you had your thoughts like pop in, and like, I failed, I couldn't meditate. I'm like, no. The whole point of getting yourself back on track when that happens. It's the same thing with entrepreneurship. Like, the failure of entrepreneurship does not happen when you like make a mistake. It fails when you refuse to get back up again. If failure is more so forgetting to be grateful and returning back to a place of gratitude rather than having a time of resentment. So I do think that's a very important kind of like, I guess, like principle to live by, or to kind of keep top of mind.
This is a fun, deep topic. But I do want to switch because we only have so much time, and there was something else you brought up that I think is really fun and is not even remotely as deep. You helped bail a friend out of a Mexican prison. I need to know the story because you haven't told it to me yet.
Yeah. So we were going to an entrepreneur event. So I actually met this friend at a baby bathwater mastermind. So it's essentially a group of like entrepreneurs in Croatia. Raphael, I believe, is also part of that group as well. And highly recommend masterminds. Is where I kind of met like all my friends these days. We met, and then we were going to a second one. We were going to Mexico. He like flew in, and he was coming off of like sleep. It was like kind of during COVID too. So it was like just a really weird time. And he was coming off of like being in this like really intense hunting trip where they like didn't sleep and all this stuff. So it's like, he's a little, delusional, and it was like a hunting range in like Texas. So he's like repacking his bags to like go to Mexico, and he leaves a box of bullets in his suitcase and goes through, and he randomly gets selected for customs check. So it's like, what are the chances? And the crazy part was, what is normal bullets in Texas is military grade bullets in Mexico.
Sure.
So
they were like military grade anywhere else.
Someone's bringing in like military grade bullets, and there isn't even a gun. It's just military grade bullets. It's a box.
Yeah.
So apparently they were like taking pictures like it was like a raid, like like those pictures of like cocaine raids and stuff. Like, they were treating it like this was a big deal, and they refused to even like let him go. Like they drove him straight from the airport to jail. I was like, he's in Mexican jail. Like, this is not good. And then part of me is like, people get out of stuff in Mexico all the time. We can just bribe them. And it's like, no, you can't. Like, they were like not able to be bribed because it was like already
like TV.
It's not like TV. And then I remember snuck in and went to, I remember bringing him like a book and some Topo Chico and some pistachios. And I was like, I'm like hugging him through the bars. It was like so dramatic. And it was escalated because they were like, we're not letting you out, and you're going to have to go to trial. You have to stay in Mexico for a month, go to trial. And if you lose, you go to jail for like 3 years. Like, it was not, this was like no joke. It was really like, this is really serious for how small this should be. Sure. And I remember going there, and we couldn't tell. We were like, there's something corrupted happening here, but we couldn't tell. And he was like assigned like a legal, like a lawyer kind of thing. And then also the cops. And we thought the lawyer was like corrupt. Turns out the cops were corrupt. And how it actually happened was I snuck in, stole his passport to like allow him to cross the border back, and like, because if they held his passport, it's over, Sure. So got his passport, and then how he actually got out was he mentioned, he was like, oh, I'm like, he's like, I have like an online presence, and he's like, like people will know. And they're like, wait, what? And they like Googled him, and like, he's not like an influencer. He's not like a crazy big influencer by any stretch, but like enough that when you Googled him, there's like YouTube videos and social media platforms. So they were like, sure. Oh crap, this can become like a really bad press story. So that was the main reason they let him out, and he was still supposed to stay for a month, and we like had to like pay for an Airbnb. in order for him to like see, like for them to let him out. And he was supposed to still go to trial and still might have been in jail for 3 years. And he literally like sneaked across the border in like Tijuana or something. Like it was a wild story. And somehow we still made it to the event. And we were like, had this like really beautiful moment, like just hugging on the beach of like, life is so weird. Life is so crazy. And like, they're kind of the stories I love as an entrepreneur. Because entrepreneurs just have the craziest stories.
Right? You get into some interesting situations.
Yeah, I also think it's always like we get ourselves into these weird situations that always end up okay because we're all like pretty good problem solvers, but also like stupid enough to end up in a situation which just is like we're psychotic enough to start a business, we're psychotic enough to put ourselves in these weird situations. And that's just like one of my favorite stories because it was like such a deep like friendship bond, and also he's one of my friends. So it's just now it's like a funny thing to look back at. If
ever there was a reason to advocate for building up your personal brand, it can keep you out of a Mexican prison. So personal branding.
I've never phrased it like that, but I'm gonna steal that now because that's fantastic. You're like, even if you never get any business ROI out of it, you never know. You never know if it might save you from jail.
Ward off, the Gestapo. I actually just released an episode of the podcast with Goldie Chan, who talks a lot about personal branding, LinkedIn and Adobe and stuff. And so it's fresh on my mind. This just went live a couple of days ago. So if you need some help on personal branding, there's an episode for that as well. Feel free to check that one out. The next question I wanted to ask you, again, completely unrelated, but getting into this because quant. You talked about quant, and we talked a little bit about math. What is your favorite, let's just say like math thing that you're like, what? No, that's not right. It like blew your mind and you're like, oh, that's just, I don't know. Like that doesn't make sense or I don't agree with it. And examples I would say were like Simpson's paradox, which I've written about in Base Theorem, which I've written about. And the other one for me, as you're thinking of yours, was when my brother, Michael Harris, told me that 0.9 repeating is the same thing as 1, that's not approaching the limit of 1. It is the same thing as the number 1. It's just different ways of writing it. And I remember initially just being like, no, that can't be right. Like this has to be wrong. And I tried desperately to try to disprove that. But there's, 3 really great proofs that have, at least 3 really great proofs that have already been used to prove that this is the exact same thing, that they're just different ways of writing the same number. But it broke me for a little while. Like I went down a really deep rabbit hole of trying to solve that this was not the case. Do you have a math thing that you're like, I really like this one?
Wow, this is like I've never been blindsided on a podcast with anyone. This one got me. I was like, I actually have no intelligent answer to this, and it's gonna kill me now because I know that there's something. But I'll not answer your question, but still be related, which is basic math principles that are like so comically basic that I'm like, why is and I think I was taught it so early on that it became like a way of life. And I'm like, does not everyone else not think like this? Like, for example, I remember when Thinking in Bets got like really popular as a book, I was like, did everyone not think probabilistically? Like, of course, all of life is probability. I'm like, I just spent 4 years doing risk analysis. Like everything is probabilistic. Like, was there any other way of looking at it? So like, that was like a really funny, like kind of enlightened moment of like, everything is probability. Like everything, it's always like, if we're going to be friends with someone, if we're going to go on this trip, if we're going to like deploy this business model, if we're going to do X, like it's always probabilistic. So that was like a big one. The other one is the concept of like expected value, so just I remember in basic economics, it's like, hey, we have the probability of something, and then like the likelihood of something happening, and then the expected output if that thing happens. Let's multiply them together, and like that is the expected value of like that particular life path, that life choice, and like that has always been like at a crossroads. I'm always goes back to expected value. It's like, what's the likelihood of this happening? What's the upside? What's the downside? And we cannot guarantee anything that happens, but we can choose the one with the highest expected value, and that includes like, selecting like, do we want to go with a riskier hire? Or do we want to go with a safer hire? And it really becomes like, well, what's the likelihood of each of them happening and working out? And also, what is the upside if they do work out? And like, that is how you make those types of decisions. So those are just kind of like 2 quick ones off the top of my head. The third one is actually statistical like extrapolation. Like when people take like they map trajectory in all these crazy ways, and I'm really realizing most of us, but humans are not very good at extrapolating exponential growth by any stretch. So I guess that's kind of like an answer to your question of like exponential growth, like really broke my brain, and like kind of relate to that as compounding. But most people do not, like, just the level of extrapolation and how they make decisions or assumptions. Most people don't really think clearly around the things that they assume and how they're mapping like the trajectory of a particular decision or a particular life path. And those are the three super top of mind ones. But now I'm going to be up at night thinking of the real answer.
Sorry, but those are really good ones though. Like even just like you said, probabilistic thinking, your brain just works that way, and it like just broke your mind to think that you're like, you mean everybody doesn't just intrinsically think along probability?
Yeah, I think that the idea that anybody thinks anything is certain in life, like the pursuit of certainty and security is like that's like blows my mind. Where I'm like,
sure.
I'm like, it's just a facade. Like, I'm like, I would rather know I have a 90% chance of this thing not working out. Pretend it's 100% chance. Like, then you're blindsided, you know? So I think that's always really interesting.
I love it. And one, I think that helps you obviously think through the concepts of retention marketing very well. And just makes it make sense. You're like, well, okay, if we do this, what's the likelihood of this happening? And if this happens, how much is that going to impact this algorithm? And so it's a very, very helpful way to approach e-commerce growth. Not to be too reductive of, the literal idea of this episode, but probabilistic thinking is a very useful skill for what you do on a day-to-day basis.
100%. And the other side of that is like, I hedge everything. Like everything is a hedge to some degree. It's like when I think about how I got started, it's like I did actuarial science, and I'm like, I don't think the likelihood of this degree working out is questionable. I'm going to hedge it by like starting something new and like getting a marketing assistant job. And I'm like, got this marketing assistant job, but like I don't know if I'm like, this is like 50-50. I want this to be a full-time job. Let me hedge it with another marketing assistant job. Yeah. And let me hedge this job with another like business. Like it's always like there's always layers, and I think that is how you can guarantee, like not like quote unquote guarantee no failure, because like you don't need any one particular thing to succeed.
Yeah, you've limited the potential for downside, right? Jess, it is absolutely amazing talking to you. I've really enjoyed this. And if people want to follow you, work with you, connect with you, what's the best way for them to reach out, stay in touch, follow?
Yeah. Twitter is going to be the best place to find me, chat with me. So that my handle is there is Jess Chan with 2 J's. And then longplaybrands.com is the best place to reach me in terms of working together.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciated talking today. Thank you for giving us your time and your knowledge.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Up Arrow podcast with William Harris. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.